Hello, everyone, and a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Ajay Jacob, and it is my great privilege to welcome you all to another installment of Humanity 2.0, a series of conversations with authors, writers, poets, and other creative thinkers. This event was conceived by Justice Collective, which is a blogging platform for insights and opinions on a broad spectrum of issues under a justice theme. And it is being hosted in collaboration with the End Bonded Labor page, which is a shared digital platform for different stakeholders working on the issue of human trafficking and bonded labor. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, who for many of you attending will need no introduction. However, in the spirit of inclusion, I'd like to share a brief intro. Nandana Dev Sen is an award-winning actor, author, and child rights activist. After studying literature at Harvard and filmmaking at the University of Southern California Film School, Nandana worked as a book editor, screenwriter, poetry translator, script doctor, and Princess Jasmine in Disneyland. In addition to starring in over 20 films, she has authored 6 children's books, which have been translated into more than 15 languages globally. The winner of the Last Girl Champion Award, she has served on the jury of a number of child protection commissions, global film festivals, and international literary prizes. Her interactive workshops have been loved by more than 30,000 young people across the world. She is the Child Protection Ambassador for Save the Children India, and has partnered with multiple child rights organizations to fight and end child abuse, including UNICEF and NCPCR. Nandana, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with everybody today. Thank you all for joining us. We are in different parts of the world, in different time zones, but it's wonderful to feel that we are together celebrating the power of children. So happy Children's Day and also happy Diwali. And thank you to the wonderful team who have put this together. I'm very, very grateful to have this opportunity to celebrate.
Thank you, Nandana. And indeed, thank you for a special thanks to the team that's been working very hard in the background to bring this together. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everybody in the audience that you can get involved in the discussion by posting questions in the chat. We will get through as many as we can in the next 60 minutes or so that we have together. So as Nandana already mentioned, given that today is Children's Day, I thought we could open the conversation by playing a short video here on Nandana's work with children. So maybe if we can, yeah. Great, thank you. Nandana, great that your daughter was able to join as well.
It's Russian, yeah. She heard. She gets very excited to see images and videos of my work with other kids. So in a couple of them, she saw herself too. So she was especially thrilled. Say hi to everybody. Hi. Mila, it's Children's Day. Can you say Happy Children's Day? Happy Children's Day. Okay.
Happy Children's Day.
So
Great. So
she'll probably go in and out. It's a Saturday morning. She's in her pajamas. There's not a lot I can do to control her.
Absolutely
So
fine. It is.
just have
It
to
is
do
their
this
day after all. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Great. So Nandana, I'd love to begin actually with your own childhood. So you had your first piece of writing published when you were still a child. Mm-hmm. And you've now written 6 children's books. So as someone who has explored a range of mediums as an artist, what makes writing, and specifically writing for children, so compelling for you?
Well, you're right. It actually does take me back to my childhood because I grew up in a family, an all-female family of writers. My mother was a very prolific writer in every genre. My grandmother was also a beloved and extremely popular poet. She was a child widow who remarried, one of the first widow remarriages. And she created an identity for herself as a best-selling poet. We grew up with her. My sister, Antara, became a journalist. I think we didn't really have an option of writing not becoming a part of our lives because that's how we grew up. And I was very, very deeply influenced by my mother and my grandmother, who also incidentally wrote a lot of children's books along with everything else. And so did my grandfather, whom I didn't really know, but my mother's father also was a leading voice in children's literature and had edited various magazines, etc. But why do I love children's literature so much now? I mean, there's so many reasons. I think the truest one is that it's just so much fun. It's fun to write for kids. It's fun to work with kids. It's fun to do workshop with kids. It's just, there is no more fun audience that a writer can have than children, honestly. So I've always had a lot of fun with kids from a young age. That's one of the reasons why I've veered toward working with kids. And so the fun of it and the freedom of it, the fact that you can use fantasy to make reality more vivid, the fact that you can transport yourselves into another world so that you can understand your own world better, is a unique it's a unique ability of film, of book, children's books, which are so transformative. So I'm drawn to the fun, the force, and the force of it, because it can a book can change the way a child looks at the world, and in doing so, it can go a long way in changing the world. Which incidentally, I slipped and said film because that's one reason why I'm drawn to film, to cinema as a medium as well, because it is very transformative. And I think these two are the two most transformative media in the arts that I know of and I'm engaged with. So that's why I love children's books so much.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit there about your grandparents and your mother. It sounds a little bit like in Asterix and Obelix, you sort of fell into the cauldron of writing when you were quite young.
It's the magic potion that I think about. I wish though that my powers were as significant and as that I was as invincible as Obelix in terms of the might of my pen, which I'm not, but I have a little bit of it. You know how it's not an Obelix situation, but when somebody has a spoon of it and there's a little bit of the magic potion rubs off, I think that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you, Nandana. And in terms of the themes that you explore in your writing, I was very curious to hear from you about whether they emerge, organically as a result of your work in other areas? You mentioned film. Or has it been a sort of a more intentional attempt to address specific issues which you perhaps feel are missing from public discourse?
That is a fantastic question, Ajay. So I think a bit of both is the answer. I think I don't really have an issue-oriented approach to books, but I do respond to the gaps that I see around me as a parent, as a writer, as a reader. So I'll give you an example. The first book that I wrote, which was not the first book that was published, the first book I wrote and sold to a publisher was called Kangaroo Kisses. It came out in the UK, and that book I wrote because I have a wonderful niece called Hia. She is in the house somewhere, I think. Hi, Hia, if you can see me. And she is adorable and extremely clever. And when she was a little younger, she's still very little, but when she was even younger, she used to find the most inventive excuses not to go to bed. So this was a story about a mother and a daughter, and a conversation, a dialogue about going to bed. The daughter keeps putting it off, and the mother keeps finding a way, a playful way of making it happen. And it completely came out of my experience of Hia, and also Hia's mother, my sister. So, but then when that became a book, I was extremely keen that this story there were two things actually. I was sure that I wanted the child in the book, our heroine, to be a little girl of color. And I feel quite strongly that while it's really important to find as many ways of embracing diversity in the books that we write for children, I also think it's really important to embrace it in such a way that is not issue oriented. So for instance, you get there are many more diverse books now than they were even 10 years ago, and it's definitely a movement that's growing. But if you'll find you're more likely to find stories about extraordinary children of color. So you'll find stories about the Brazilian soccer champion who is little, or the Native American warrior princess, right? But what if we simply want to see a story about a little girl who doesn't want to go to sleep, who is having this playful fight with her mother? It has nothing to do with the color of her skin or where she lives. But so you are faced with the question, well, if it doesn't, then why does it have to be? Why does it have to be a child of color? Well, that is the way you widen the scope of diversity in children's literature by bringing diversity into every story, not just issue-oriented stories. So that's an example of a spark that happened, in my life because of a very personal and wonderful, very special relationship I have with my beloved niece. But when it became a book, there were other priorities that I had in terms of shaping the identity of the book. So, I mean, and then Mambi and the Forest Fire came out of a workshop that I did with children who had been rescued from trafficking. But with that, one of the things, if there's time, I'll talk about that later. But just in terms of the question that you asked, this book can be read in a lot of different ways, but it is essentially about embracing everyone's unique identity. So it celebrates the different abilities of every child. And not surprising, although Mambi is a beloved character with all children, it's been a book that has been really loved by children who are struggling with disabilities, with special needs, because there aren't enough books that actually address their reality. So that was something that was in my mind. Although this book is not about that directly, it is also about that in a different way.
Yeah, that's great.
So
so you mentioned Mambi and the Forest Fire, and that was the first one that was published, even though it wasn't the first one you wrote. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Your research is impeccable. It wasn't the first, it was the first one that was published, although the first one I wrote and signed was Kangaroo Kisses. Yeah, they both came out the same year, so it's really a matter of months.
It was quite close by.
Mm.
Yeah. So you were saying it was. So I read that it was sort of created in a way in a room full of kids at a workshop you ran at Sneha, which is a home
That's
for
right.
children and women rescued from trafficking. So I think we do have another short video here about Mambi, which we can play, and then I'd like to ask you a little bit more about how that came about.
Did
That's
you
a
like it? Mhm.
really cute video.
I'm sorry,
So
were you hearing the editorial comments that my daughter was making while it was showing?
no. We just a little bit, but not. It wasn't too loud. Don't worry. So, what do you remember specifically? What happened in the workshop?
Yes, of
And
course.
what?
I mean, when I walked in to do the workshop, oh, she wants
Yeah.
to show the book. Yes, that is the book. You're right. Um, okay. I don't think I ever need a publicist. I think
No,
I have.
I think she's
I
doing a
have a
great job. Yeah.
publicist right at home. So, what happened? I do these workshops frequently with kids in children's homes, and the idea is to encourage them to express their feelings through music and dance, through performance, sometimes through writing, and with and usually the kids are they're raring to go. It's a very sweet challenge to actually try to calm them down and organize them. But in this particular group, partly because the group hadn't been together for that long, but partly because they had come from very severe traumas. They had come from either the streets or they'd been rescued with their mothers from brothels. There was a lot of trauma in their lives, and that was very immediate still. It was very close to them still. So I found that this group they were very shy. They didn't have the confidence to jump into the things that we do in the way that the others that I usually work with did. So I had to break the ice, and I created a monkey called Mambi, who was very shy and very kind, but didn't have confidence and wanted to do thought that everybody else was better at doing things than she was. So she wanted to jump and fly, as you saw in the video. But ultimately, she realizes that she has her own special gift. She wanted to fly and swim, but she realizes that she has her own special gift of jumping, and also, even more importantly, that she has courage and she has kindness. So as we were, but what's fantastic is that the story, I mean, I didn't have a script in my head when I went into it, but by the time we were done with the workshop, the story was complete because the kids created the other characters. Some, they put the forest on fire. They determined that Mambi would be the one who would save everybody. And it was one of the most fun workshops I've ever had. And when I left that, the home, when I left Sneha,
Yeah.
I had the book in my head. That's how it happened.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So it's just like you just
Yeah.
light a spark and then you just kind of watch the magic kind of happening, right? So it's
That's the incredible thing with kids, is that if they trust you, just the power of their imagination and also their kind of commitment to connecting, really.
mm.
Most kids want to connect with you. Most kids want to share. They're so eager
Yeah.
to share whatever, even if they're not happy things, they want to share it, which is such a healthy quality to have if we all manage to hold on to that as we grew up, and were more open about sharing what we were going through, the good stuff and the bad stuff. I think we would be better adjusted grown-ups. But no, I learned a lot, as I always do, from the kids in that particular workshop. And and a book came out of it. And then now Mambi is a very, very popular character,
Yeah.
and she has to be. There have been demands that she come back in another book, so that I have to do that. One thing that I did want to say in this, just looping back to the question you had asked earlier about how, do I make conscious choices based on what I see missing in the world of children's literature. This is another one of the things that I always do, is that my protagonists, my heroes, are always girls, and that's because there's a huge imbalance in children's literature. There's a huge gender imbalance in children's literature, right? So, I mean, less than a third of the characters of the heroes in children's literature are girls. So I do that, but you have to do that very carefully, because boys are much more gender specific readers than girls. Girls will easily read books that have boy heroes, whereas boys are much less likely to read books that have girl heroes. So I'm really delighted that Mambi is completely, it's loved as much by boys and by girls, and that has managed to happen with my other books that have girl heroes as well. But that's always something that you have to be especially sensitive to in terms of the choices you're making, to make clear that make it as equal, as attractive to boys as well as it is to girls.
Yeah. Wow. Very interesting. Just staying with the literature theme for a moment, Nandana. Yesterday, you mentioned kindness being one of the themes in Mambi, and yesterday was, of course, World Kindness Day. And a lot of your writing explores topics such as, kindness, empathy, inclusion, and even justice.
Right.
And yet, parents or anyone really who's had conversations with children will probably recognize that it's a bit of a struggle to be able to engage meaningfully without either simplifying or complicating. And so how do you find that balance in your books as well as workshops, that you have with children about the books?
And as a parent, I think that that's again a really important question to ask. I think as a children's book writer, the most important thing is to tell your story in a way that's engaging. You have to, it has to be playful and fun and not preachy at all. I don't believe in. That's why I don't actually write books that are about issues, although sometimes they're described as that. I write about worlds in certain worlds in my books which may not have been represented adequately. But so I think it's really important not to seem didactic. It's really important for the books to, for the stories to be playful and imaginative and to stand on their own. But children are like sponges. They're curious. They absorb everything that you tell them. That's why the fun part of it also comes with a huge responsibility. You are working with extremely, pliable minds. So I have found it very easy and kind of, not easy, I would say very satisfying to discuss some of these more complicated notions of justice, of equality with children. And I haven't actually found it hard because, I mean, what you need to, so since we're talking about Mambi, let me stick with that for a moment as an example. So when I do, so Mambi ultimately, she wants to fly and swim, and then she realizes she's perfect being a jumper. Now, what I do is I talk about the fact that it doesn't matter whether you swim or jump or fly, you all are equal in terms of the love you deserve, and in terms of the way you can help the world and your abilities, what you can do all together. So we talk, and so we use this as a sparking point to talk about equality, and I do this in all my workshops. So we talk about flying and swimming and jumping, and segue from that into the fact that it doesn't matter. Equality is a big word, so I break it down as sameness. I talk about having the same rights, or the same, deserving the same love and respect. So we move from that to talking about how boys and girls are the same, how whether we come from the city or the village or the jungle, we're the same, whether we're Hindu or Muslim or Christian or Jain or Buddhist or Sikh or Parsi, we are the same. So, and children really respond to it very, very strongly. And I think there is such a crisis in certain areas in our country right now. For instance, the notion of secularism, and I think it's confusing for children uh, to kind of grow up in a world where it just seems like, to some people, certain there are just boundaries that they feel, and writing children's books and using my characters and sometimes the worlds that they live in, whether it's a fantasy world of um, a jungle, or whether it's a bedroom of a little girl, using that as a way of talking about some of these issues that surround them around the world, is really, it's really rewarding and fun. There are other things like, I mean, basically, one thing I will say is that there's the side of it that one can do as an author. There's also, I do feel very strongly that as a parent, I mean, I wouldn't say every parent has his or her own parenting style, but as a parent, I do not want to shield my child too much from these difficult questions, from these important questions like justice, like equality. Why? Because, this is a world where a child is surrounded by poverty, by homelessness, by, now there's a pandemic, there's death. I mean, there's death everywhere around us. There's war, there's violence, there are riots, right? So while I think it is important to protect your child to a certain extent, I think overprotecting ill-equips them to get a clear understanding of the world, and also to actually develop a sense of justice. If you, I mean, we talk about the riots that we've had about George Floyd's death, and it's already to make Black Lives Matter, or now the Lit Lives Matter, are very present concepts. So I think it's really important to expose them. I mean, when I wrote Mambi, people said at some point, oh, there's a fire, people could, there could be death. Whenever there's a fire, there's the threat of death, and children won't like it. And that has not been the case. Children love it because, yes, there is threat, but what happens in it is that people come together and help each other, and the situation is safe. So the importance of helping. So one of the ways in which, again, I use that is to talk about the fact that even though we're all equal, we have the same rights. Some of us may need help more. So, and that can be interpreted as being in poverty or in war or in a forest fire, and we need to help those who need help to equalize. And that's another way that one can talk about, instill notions of kindness, empathy, not even instill, I think just bring it out more, have children think about it more. I think parents, apart from books, one more thing that I wanted to say is that, well, actually, I'll come back to it at some point. There's so much to say about this. You've asked me a question that I could go on talking about for an hour. But
yeah, no, I mean, by all means, feel free to add if you like, and if not, I do have a question about specifically around parenting, and it's a good link to your next book actually, that we'll be talking about your most recent book, titled "In My Heart." And now that you mentioned parenting, I know that's also about parenting and deals with a topic that's very personal to you. There is another video which I think we can play here, so maybe we can take a look at that one first.
Okay. Okay.
So this one so I know it's about adoption, but I would like you to tell the story of this one, Nandana. What was it specifically that compelled you to?
What is this book called? What is this book?
The Heart Book.
This is the Heart Book? Yeah. And who is it about?
Me and Mama and Daddy.
It's not. Yes, that's right. That's
Actually, it's really about me.
Well, it's as you can see, it is very personal. It wasn't actually. It has become a book that's Meghla's book, but it wasn't actually written about her. So I had been thinking, for as long as I've been working with children who are institutionalized or homeless, I've been thinking about the fact that even though we know that hundreds and thousands, millions actually, there are 2 million children who live on the streets in India. Just think about that, right? So there's so many countless lives of children that could be transformed by loving homes, even though we all know that. There is such little discussion of adoption, whether it's in our children's books, in popular culture, in our mainstream media. And so I wanted to write about it. I wanted to have a book that was for children, that thank you, my love, that addressed adoption. I also wanted to, I noticed also, speaking about, again, going back to your early excellent question about how to decide what to write on. I also saw that there is a real lack of books that talk about non-traditional family structures, especially in India. So I wrote this book not only about keeping adopted families in mind, but also, there's so many beautiful ways in which families come together now, whether it's through surrogacy, whether it's through second marriages, whether it's through gay parenting. And I really wanted to write a book that would speak to families that belong to alternative structures, family units, but also that would make kids who are from a more traditional background more sensitive to a world in which a lot of their peers may not have exactly the same kind of family background or structure as they have. So that's why I had been thinking of writing it. But once once my adoption, I'd been wanting to adopt from when I was very, very young, like practically, not much more than a child. So when Megla came into our lives, then this theme, which was always urgent to me, became emergent, and I wrote the book.
Yeah. I really like, I mean, I was thinking as you were speaking this, I think there's a lot of talk these days about, the otherness, and people are always aware of how different they are. But I love how you're trying to flip it around to sort of togetherness, and sort of, so it's less about sort of the differences, but the fact that we're all, same and, kind of in it together. And I think that's such a beautiful sort of thing to have instilled in children, and hopefully they carry that, into adulthood. I do have a question here, Nandana, about In My Heart, if I could bring that in. So Lyris, I hope I've pronounced the name correctly, says, In My Heart is a favorite of ours. It's what it's what me and my wife used to open our daughter's world into a fact that she has a tummy mummy too. And we did that last year as she turned 4 years old. We loved your book because it spoke about our story and in some ways also gave us an answer to where her tummy mummy was. The only portion we skip in the book, or rather explain differently, is the clinic portion, because adoption for us was out of choice and this had nothing to do with infertility. Do you have any comments on that?
No, I think that makes absolute sense, because you want to adopt. I'm so glad. I can't tell you how happy it makes me to hear your comment and your question, because that's exactly why I wanted, that's the main reason why I wanted to write this book, is to give adoptive families a way of being able to talk about the history of their family. Understandably, there's a lot of confusion and fear still in India with adoptive parents about what's the right time, how do you do it. There are worries about kids being bullied, so very often parents don't talk about it until much later, sometimes not at all, which is not a great idea. So there are all of these things, and I wanted to write a book that would make it easy. And the other thing is that sometimes, even though a child understands that they did not come out of your tummy, that they came out of your heart, or however you want, some parents say, God sent you and you came into our lives, etc. There are different ways. Everybody has a metaphor for it. At some point, it is really important for the child to understand that there is a tummy mummy, because that question will come up. And if that is not introduced early enough in the lives of the family members here, that can be quite traumatic for the child to think, oh, I have a mummy, but then I have another mummy, and why is she not with me, etc. So bringing that in is really important. As far as the clinic, that is a completely, my situation is exactly the same as yours. I always wanted to adopt. I didn't try to have a child. That was the way I wanted to. That was going to be my route to motherhood, to parenting always. But for a lot of parents, that's not the way it is, which is fine too. You try other ways, and then you decide that this is the right way. So I wanted to be inclusive, and I didn't want it to seem like I was making a political point about it. I wanted it to be a practical book. But I completely hear you, and I'm glad that you're adapting it to suit the truth in your family.
Thank you.
I'd love to find out more about I guess we'll have the chat, will have our friends' email or in all of that, right? We should share emails at some point.
Yeah, and we can Yeah, we can mention your Facebook page and your other handles for them to get in touch with you, and so that you can continue the conversation maybe. But thank you, Nandana. I mean, on a related note, I mean, it is somewhat still a sensitive, issue at adoption, particularly in India. And the book obviously, plays a vital role in having those, normalizing it sort of after it's happened. But what would you say to people who are maybe thinking about adoption, but are perhaps a bit wary of what they see as, this emotional sort of minefield? Is there something that, you would you'd say to that?
Yeah, so much to say about this again, and every person's experience is different. Parenting is an emotional minefield, as you would know, Ajay. The truth is, we often think until we are in it that the parenting issues will be, that if we were, that adoption makes it a kind of, you enter a war zone in a way that you wouldn't if you had children biologically. But that's not the case. Even if you have children biologically, you will be entering a minefield, especially as they become teenagers. But that said, there are specific challenges, of course, in adoption, because depending on what the history of the child is, there are challenges that sometimes you would need to expect, accept, and deal with. And some of them can be very painful. I mean, we've been very lucky, but sometimes children don't, have a hard time, take longer to attach to their parents for obvious reasons. There are lots of defense mechanisms kids have who have traumatic early childhoods, right? But the most important thing is that there is no greater joy. There's no greater joy than, and I don't mean this just sort of in a kind of philanthropic kind of way. Of course, there's no greater joy than giving a child who needs a home, yes. But there's no greater joy than bringing a child into your life, the kind of energy, love, challenge, daily challenges that a child who enters your life will bring into your life are so extraordinary. And, I mean, it's not always peaceful, but it's always beautiful. It's always very fulfilling. So, I mean, apart from the argument that, which I also believe in, the fact that in India we have hundreds and thousands of children who really need to be adopted, who are waiting, who would love to, and we don't have a proper system, honestly, of like a seamless way, but we need to have, we need parents to lose their fear about this. And then the other thing is that, there's a kind of, we have to break the cycle of fear and regressive thinking about adoption. I mean, if we see adoption just as, and that was part of the reason I wrote In My Heart also, just to make it clear that it doesn't matter whether you're connected, whether you're a biological child or an adopted child, we are all connected through the heart. It's the love that actually attaches us. It's not the genes. And that, what we experience as families are very, very similar because we're families. And every family has its own challenges, and certain biological families will have challenges that adopted families may not have, and the other way around. As you said, I think in this, when you think about adoption, it's really important to see the sameness of it. To your point, Ajay, it's really important to understand that this is not different. A non-traditional family unit, if it has two daddies, not two mummies, will still have the same rituals, will still have the same love, it's not a different universe that you're entering, right? So I think it's really important to look at adoption in a celebratory way, not in an apologetic way, which is I was glad to get that comment from the last friend, to where, they said that this was not that it was a choice that they made, not not a last resort. There's nothing wrong with it being a last resort. That's absolutely fine too. And even that is a reason to celebrate, right? I mean, any way that a child can enter into your life is a reason to celebrate. So I think there's a kind of silence about it. There's actually a pervasive silence about adoption, a stigma and a silence both about adoption and about alternative family units, like uh, families with gay parents. And I think we need to get rid of that. We need to um, really understand that, and we need to talk about it in a very, kind of normal, casual way. Like the fact that our child is adopted, in some families, the word adopted is sort of seen as a negative word. So you don't want to use that word adopted because you don't want to upset the child, or you don't want the child to think that she's any different. But the truth is, if you use it very easily and non-self-consciously, she won't think that it's different. I mean, everybody has differences in their identity. I'm a girl, you're a boy, I wear glasses, you don't, so it becomes something like that, as opposed to something that feels like it makes you inherently different from everybody. So I think the more we can normalize it by talking about it, by breaking the, and the other thing is that when the silence and stigma about adoption shows, what does it show? It actually shows that there's a deep-seated anxiety in our culture about it. And the only way to break through that is to be absolutely open and forthright about it, talk about it, be joyful rather than fearful.
Thank you. Yeah, as you say, it's quite difficult to obviously, kind of speak in so briefly about what is clearly quite a, complex topic.
Right.
But thank you for that. There are some more questions, in fact, coming from the audience. I was going to ask if you would read from In My Heart, but maybe we could take this one more question from the audience before we do that.
Sure.
So this is from Inder. He says, appreciate the candor and the breadth of the conversation, especially given that I'm an adoptive parent. On stories and storytelling, we're speaking of English language stories and narratives. What observations would you have on the local language landscape, and where can we point kids to stories beyond the Amar Chitra Katha and literature of that kind, especially to do with some of these challenging issues, especially the modern ones you are helpfully addressing?
Well, there's some, that's a really lovely question. There are some, I will tell you the truth. Honestly, there is more of a concentration of books in English that deal with topics such as this. But there are some publishing companies like Tulika that does wonderful bilingual books. We have several of them. And I think the thing to do is to find out what, I mean, there are many actually publishing houses that do books that are more sensitive to topics that are not easily found in children's books. So there's, Katha, there's Pickle Yoke books, Puffin, of course, does a lot of them, et cetera, et cetera. But I think from what you're saying, it's important to find out which companies are doing bilingual books or vernacular books, and find that. And the one that I can think of, the two that I would think of immediately, and I have a lot of their books, and I'm a Tulika author as well, are Tulika and Pratham, also Katha. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for the question in there. There is one other question from Partha, and he asks, what about all the street children in India? How do we solve that? And he goes on to say, I should have adopted them, but I did not. will the new generation do that? I suppose it's, yeah.
Well, I'm very glad you asked that question because, you know, we can't solve that as individuals. It is a collective shame that we bear on our shoulders. And to change that, so much has to change. And I believe that. I actually, you asked an important question, but you also indicated the answer. I think the solution actually lies with the next generation, with the youth of today, who are very, I mean, I work with a lot of them in Save the Children, and they're extremely committed young people with very strong moral compasses. I think what we do need to do, I mean, one of the, of course, adoption is ultimately we want the children who are homeless, street-related children. We want to find ways of them being safe. Now, whether it's through institutions, whether it's through fostering, we don't have a really great system for that, like other countries do. You know, because even though it may not be great to go from, you know, go into a temporary fostering home, that's still better than being on the street. But it's not, so we have to find a way of transitioning these children and putting them in a safe environment. If they have to be on the street, then we need to make sure that we can do whatever is in our power to make them safe within that, in that space, in terms of food, in terms of education, in terms of healthcare. And I think, honestly, the most important thing is, I'm going back to what I said earlier, is for all of us to think that those children on the streets are our responsibility, that they are our children. I think there has to be a huge shift in the way we look at the crisis of street-related children, the crisis of child labor, the crisis of child trafficking. We need to understand that this is, even if our world is very disconnected from their world, which, especially if you live in a country like India, our country, you can do that very easily, you know, but the child on the street, the child who has been sold, the child who is who is trapped in hazardous labor, they are our problem as well. We cannot say that's not my problem, right? It's a defense mechanism we have. And I think it's important to make children understand this. Okay, again, this is, others may disagree with me because these are painful realities, but I don't want to live in a world where a child grows up being used to seeing child laborers around her. That is not the way the world should be. So if there is something very wrong with the world that she sees, I think I would rather address that and make her understand that than go along with my life hoping she didn't notice that. So with Meg Life, we go to a shop and there's a child selling us things, a tea shop or a candy shop or a clothes shop on Goriya Hut in Kolkata. I will ask the child, hey, so what's going on? Why are you in school? Where are your parents? Etc. And there's always a story, and you know, and I'm not necessarily there to solve it every time. Sometimes they are, you know, resources you can share, but so what I mean is that it's, so much of it is really the mindset of the nation and understanding that this is everybody's problem, and we have to, each of us, hold ourselves accountable for the safety of the children of India.
Yeah, thank you. And there are a few more questions here about, you know, some of the work that you do with organizations. So maybe we can cover that in the next section, Nandana. But before we move on, we've spent some time talking about, you know, this in my heart as well, would you like to read for us from In My Heart? And then we can move to the next.
Let me
Thank
get my daughter here because she loves to hear this. Megla,
you. Sure.
Megla, I'm reading your heart book. I think I'm reading your heart book. Do you want to come? Okay. So, Mia knew. Can you turn the pages for me? Mia knew that she came from her mother's heart and her father's heart, her mama's heart and her papa's heart. Tell me how I came out of your hearts. She loved asking them at bedtime. Mia was 4, and this was her favorite story of all time. Well, said Papa, we were waiting for you for a long time. We looked for you everywhere. Where is our daughter? Where is Mia the moonbeam? Where could she be? We kept looking and looking, said Mama. We looked in my tummy. We looked in the clinic. I even looked through all the books I wrote. They were full of other little girls, but not Mia. Then one day, said Papa, we found you. Where was I? Mia liked to ask every time. You were hiding in our hearts, my treasure, laughed Mama. You've always loved playing hide and seek. Mia especially loved to play hide and seek with her friend Neil. And they made up special dance moves like what? Like the Wrigley Bottom. You want to show them the Wrigley Bottom? Okay, I'll let them see your Wrigley Bottom move. Anyway, so she's very, very proud of her move. One day, Neil came over to play with his mother, Preeti. Why is your tummy so big? Mia asked her. Because Neil's sister or brother is in it, she smiled. Baby is coming next month. Neil bounced up and down. Oh, said Mia. Will your tummy get small again after that? Yes. Baby won't be in my tummy anymore, you see. Mia kept thinking about that big tummy as Mama washed her with soap and Papa cooked Thai red curry. After I came out of your hearts, did your hearts become small again? No, said Papa. When you come out of someone's heart, a part of you always stays in it, making it bigger. That's right, making it bigger, making it even bigger.
Thank you. I do have, there are more questions coming in. I think we have about another 15 minutes or so, so we'll try and get through as many of these as we can. There is a question. So actually, this is a good segue into talking about some of your activism work, which I know is very important to you. So you work with Rahi, the children's NGO Operation Smile. And you're obviously an ambassador for Save the Children India. So just looking at that, there's maybe a question here that we can bring in from Princey. It says, having had experience working with children's homes, how do you encourage shelter homes, local governments, communities to invest in libraries in these homes? So this is, I think, bringing in your two worlds together in one question. So specifically, I think around encouraging reading in some of these institutions.
It's really hard, actually. I've tried to, and that's a real challenge. As a policy, for instance, whenever I have a book out, when the book tour gets when all the appearances get set up, I always do sessions in children's homes, and we distribute, and we give copies of the books. I've tried to set up libraries. Actually, there's the home that Megla was adopted from. We wanted to create a library for them, but they said that they wouldn't be able to save the books, that the kids would destroy them, and that they didn't have the manpower to actually have a librarian who was going to be in charge and would be able to, or they would have to keep it all locked up, in which case the children wouldn't have access to it. So then we ended up creating a whole kind of play station, like a playground, which they also didn't have, for them instead. But it left me very sad, because I do think books are such an important way of processing your reality and understanding the world. So I think I think it would be great if it became a policy. I think if it became, uh, I mean, a lot of things would have to come together. I think it would be great for it to be part of the design of every institution. If the government put in the budget a space for books and a budget for getting books, right? And an hour into their daily routine, which is library hour, where you're going there and that's what you're doing. It's also important for corporations to think, especially publishing companies, to think more about it as part of their CSR, giving more books away and planning that in their business plan, so that it's, I mean, what happens often is that there are donations of books, but they're kind of one-off situations. And what we need is this consolidated national policy that has support from the government, that has support from industry, that has support from civil society organizations and communities, so that it can really be a multi-armed, multi-pronged approach to addressing literacy in children's homes. I hope that answers your question.
And so just, I think this is a good moment to talk about the present situation in terms of COVID, and obviously everything that's going on. And so when we look specifically at gender-based violence and trafficking, which you've spoken a lot about on various forums, what are some of the things that worry you the most, given the pandemic and the extended lockdowns? Is there, obviously sort of...
Yes,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, it is. Honestly, the situation in India in child trafficking is just horrifying. There are no other ways to talk about it. India has the largest number of child trafficking victims in the whole world. Every 8 minutes, a child disappears in India and is sold into a life of exploitation. The numbers are staggering. The trauma for every child who gets trafficking and who gets trafficked is staggering. And because of the lockdown, as you said, children who are already at risk are more at risk, because there is no access to education. There is no access to healthcare. You don't have access even to the midday meal that you had in school. Your family is going through a loss of income, possibly sickness, so that they can't work, or because of the lockdown, there is no work. There is a real crisis in food security. So all of this puts young girls much more at risk for trafficking, and puts young boys as well at risk for child labor. I think it increases the risk of child labor and child trafficking hugely. The other thing that happens is that there's a lot of violence, that there's been a real increase in violence, in gender-based violence in this time. There's been an increase in domestic abuse, in sexual violence, also sexual abuse at home. There's been an increase in early marriages. So it is a crisis. We are seeing a crisis in terms of child safety of a kind that I don't think we have seen in any other time. And it's extremely disturbing. So I think young people are actually speaking out against this. Young people, youth advocates and activists are very effective in their intervention and in their advocacy, and that's certainly a sign of hope. But there's just so much work that needs to be done. And our laws, I mean, I don't even want to get started, but we need a really robust and also implementable anti-trafficking bill, which we do not have. We need a bill that protects the victims better and criminalizes the perpetrators, not the other way around. And it's just there's so much work at so many levels that needs to happen to really deal with this crisis.
Yeah, I want to take one more question around the sort of the lockdown situation, and then maybe move on to some other, because I do want to have you read a couple more bits, and maybe then after that we'll take a few more audience questions. So this is an interesting one from Amita. She says, subjectively speaking, 2020 is the best year a child could have. Parents are at home, school on screens, screens are no longer a taboo. And for my daughter, pets have been a huge energy sapper, which is good for the parents in brackets. Do you think otherwise, or are children soaking in the despair and hopelessness that we as adults see around us?
You know, I think kids pick up on everything. So as much as we try to protect them from our stresses, they just seep through. And I think, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think in some ways, kids are happier to spend more time with their parents, especially their busy parents who are not usually stay-at-home parents, and now they are. But I think it is, I mean, you know, my daughter, I'll just give you an example of Megla. She is 6. She's extremely energetic, hyperactive. She's very communicative, very social. She spent 7 months not seeing a single other child, not one child, because we were in the epicenter of the world. We were in New York. And then, you know, in the summer, she saw a couple of, you know, some play dates in the park. And now it's kind of closing down again. She started going to school, which was only once a week. The rest of it was online. And I mean, I could see how energized she got by the one day that she spent with kids. So I think while a lot of what you say is true, I think we can't, I think children who have siblings are having a much easier time because they have another child in their lives, at least, you know. I think for single kids, it's really hard. For teenagers, it's really difficult, even more difficult for teenagers and for tweens. So it is, I think it's been, I mean, children are naturally resilient, you're right. I think children have many more resources in terms of, you know, many more coping skills than we do, and they have been using it. They've been called upon to use it, and they're doing it. I mean, you know, my child does, who has barely the attention span to sit in one place for more than 5 seconds, is doing long play dates on the phone. You know, I never thought she would be playing, you know, Lion King on the phone with somebody else. And this is not a video game. They're actually physically hide. She plays hide and seek on the, I can't even begin to think how one can play hide and seek on the phone, but she's learned to do that and she loves to do that. So, you know, kids adapt, and I think they're having a good time. I think the important thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times children don't know the stress that they feel. So they don't express it. They're not able to express it. It's not something that is clear to them enough that they can put it in words. But you'll see it in other ways. You'll see that the child is now not wanting to sleep in her bed anymore. She wants to sleep with you. She's a bit more clingy. She, you know, behavior changes, which we may not think is connected to the pandemic and the lockdown, but they very often are. It's just, it's a way, it's a different way that it's being expressed, even if it doesn't seem to be directly related.
Thank you. So we, I think we have about 15 minutes or so. I don't know where the last 1 hour and 15 minutes went, and I'm sure we could speak for hours. But I do want to ask you. So last month you dedicated an iconic poem by your mother, Nandana Dev Sen. It was translated by you and dedicated to all girls on the International Day of the Girl. Maybe we can quickly play that short video, which is also powerful call to action. I found that video very moving. And we can then ask a couple of quick questions.
Sure. Hi everyone, this is Nandana Sen, and I wish all of you a mighty day of the girl. On this very special day, I dedicate my favorite poem to all girls. You know why? Because you are invincible. This poem was written in Bangla by my mother, Nandana Dev Sen, but I translated it just for you. Are you ready? It's called Right Now, Forever. Time has not the power to extinguish me. Don't think for a moment that I wait upon time. Let time keep on playing his absurd battle game. Every time he strips me, I rise clothed without shame. With the force of prayer, of spells magic and divine, all that was untimely will turn auspicious, sublime. In a just war, the rebel stands forever unafraid. For her ally is eternity, who, divinely arrayed, guides her chariot, destroying the enemy line. Thus, a divisive age will be defeated and spurned. Though it brings on great wars, it will lose every time. From all our scriptures, this is the truth I have learned. Please know that I am cherished by an infinite, undivided age. Time will never have the power to scorch me with its rage. Dear girls, always remember that you are so cherished and you are so strong. Nothing and nobody can extinguish your flame. Not now, not ever. Happy Day of the Girl.
So, so this one is one of the poems. Is I think you're translating a collection
Yes.
of your mother's poems. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And that's it's in an upcoming book. Would you like to share a little bit more about that?
Sure. This is a book called Acrobat, and it's being published in New York very soon, in the next few months. My mother knew about this book. She actually signed the contract with me just a couple of weeks before she died, and she was very excited about it. So this book is very important to me. You know, this poem, I selected it. I was going to dedicate a poem on Day of the Girl as Save the Children's Child Protection Ambassador. But I chose this one because if you remember, that was the time when we were feeling especially distraught by the brutal murder and rape of the Dalit teenager in Hathras. And I wanted to share a poem that was about countering violence, and that had a message had an inspiring message of invincibility. I felt that the youth of India really needed to hear that girls were feeling extremely vulnerable. And they are. This is a time when gender-based violence has been going up and up. It is not a safe time for women and children right now. So that's why I chose that particular one. And the response from young people especially has been really overwhelming. So my book is called Acrobat, and it has a collection of my mother's poetry that, you know, written over 60 years of her life. It's a selection, I should say, not a collection. So yeah, that's my next project. I need to send that off to press in the next few days.
Your mother was, of course, a celebrated poet herself, so it must be wonderful for you to be able to bring her work to a new audience and as well through translating. So looking forward to seeing that when that comes out. And then I'd like to take a couple more questions from the audience, if that's okay. We've still got a lot. Sadly, we won't be able to answer all of them. but I'll take a couple now. And after that, I know Nandana will be closing with a reading from one of her children's books. So please do stay on for that. If you have young people in the house who would like to listen, they would of course be very welcome. The question that I have here is from Ajoy, and he says, Nandana, you mentioned that the street children must be seen as our children. Would you share some thoughts about how this might be possible?
So how that might be possible is by thinking about what you can do immediately to make them more safe. Okay, so if you're talking about, I'm interpreting that you're not asking an abstract question, you're asking about concrete ways, right? And if that's the case, the first thing you do is to find out about the child's, if you see the same child on the street outside your home every day, you find out what the situation is, find out why she is not in school, how you might be able to help put her in that school, how you could call child. Of course, the first thing that we can all do, which is an easy thing to do, is to call Childline. But you can find what the options are for finding a safe place for the child. So there are so many things that we can do rather than just walk past. I think the involvement of bystanders is so important in bringing about transformation, not just about, and that's in every area where we have a crisis. So for instance, in violence against girls, if you see that a child or a girl is being attacked, you can't walk away. That is not an option, although that is what happens most often. Think about what happened to Nirbhaya or Jyoti Singh. She was brutalized and thrown out of the bus onto the pavement, and people just walked past her. Nobody helped her. We do not want to be those people, right, who just walk by. That's what I mean. So we have to, every crisis that we see, even if it is not directly related to us, we have to see it as our crisis, as our problem, because only then will we be able to change, have a systemic change, both in terms of attitude and eventually in terms of policy, I think.
And there's another one here from Sulakshana, which I think is maybe more of a suggestion rather than a question, but she says, would you be interested in writing a book on the situation of bonded laborers in India or children working as child bonded laborers, as we find very few authors writing on this issue? It's important to bring it out into the light, the perpetual bondage and their struggle to live a dignified life.
Yeah, I think it is important to write that. I think it is very important to write that story. It's not an easy story to write, which is why I think it hasn't been written. But I'm glad to have your suggestion, and please feel free to be in touch with me. I don't know what your background is. If you work in that area, do you? Are you involved with an organization that works to fight and stop bonded labor? It's a question. I don't know if she can hear me.
I'm sure she can,
but
hopefully we can get an answer from her. And if not, we can ask her to get in touch separately.
Yeah, we can share. I'm happy to share my email in the chat or something. And I would love to find out more about her thoughts.
Surely, ma'am, surely. It's a pleasure listening to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sulakshana, for asking that question. It's an important one.
Yeah. Thank you. So just looking at the time, and it's a pity that I have to keep looking at the time, but we are almost out of time. But I know that Nandana, as she just said, is very happy to be contacted via her Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Nandana Dev Sen. So please reach out in case you have more questions for her. And you'll also find all the videos we showed today, along with lots more information on her website, which is nandanadevsen.com. So Nandana, if yeah, we have a few minutes left. I wonder whether you'd be so kind as to do one more reading from one of your children's books, which I think would be a fitting way to end this conversation on Children's Day.
Let me get my reading partner here. Megla!
Sure, absolutely.
We're going to read Kangaroo Kisses, right? And you know what to say, right? Now, actually, everybody who is in this is a take a moment to bring your kids here if they're around you. Megla, can you be here, baby, please? Okay. Because your kids are actually going to read with us today, okay? So whenever I say not yet, your kids and all of you, even if you don't have kids, have to say not yet back, okay? Even if you're on mute, even if there's nobody else, or even if you're in a crowded room full of people, you have to yell out not yet, because that's the refrain, all right? So let's hear the team here, the Justice Collective team here, say not yet as loudly as possible. Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet.
Good. Ajay, I didn't hear your voice.
I think it was happening as an echo. I think it would be difficult to time this, but I definitely said it.
Okay, as long as you definitely said it. Megla, can you come, baby?
The timing might be an issue, but the passion will not be. So.
Candy Frog, where is Megla? Oh,
she's hiding
a frog, already a frog under the chair. Can a frog stand on its head? Darling, it's time for bed. Not yet. Megla?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Great. I'm learning to fly with geese in the sky. See your duck in the tub? Won't you give her a scrub? Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
My hippos and puddles need sleepy cuddles. I'll snuggle wild whale and nuzzle her tail. Then I'll race alligator. No, chase him later. Choose PJs, blue, pink, and please have your drink.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Shantana's clearly read this book before, but yeah.
If I tickle giraffe, she'll giggle and laugh. I'll sing with rhinos and dance on their toes. Wait, darling, hush. Let's find your toothbrush.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Yet.
Elephant floss to make his teeth gloss. Then I'll brush furry bear. Please brush your own hair. Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
See? Monkey needs a squeeze. She sleeps in those trees.
Finish.
Hear
I'll get
the
tomorrow.
clock? Hear it chime? You know it's bedtime. But I must hug my cup, and I must tuck you up. I will kiss kangaroo. No, now I will kiss you. Will you turn out the light and hug me good night? Yes?
Yes.
I love
Yes.
you.
I love you. You do.
And I love you too. Night, night.
Good night.
Oh, that
Happy
was
Children's
wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. I
Happy
love how
Beautiful
Megla was
conversation.
totally in character as well. And I definitely heard a few not yet. So well done to everyone for getting
Yeah,
involved.
I heard a lot of not yets too. I think the audience did me proud in terms of the not yets. I'm very,
Yeah.
very happy.
Yeah, and thank you
Very
so much,
responsible.
Megla, for joining. And Nandana, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you
Oh,
for
it's
your
been
time.
great to-
Yeah,
your
it's been a
words.
fantastic
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah,
Thank
and thank you so much for your passion and commitment. And thank you also to everyone who made the time to join us today, especially those of you in India where Diwali celebrations are probably in full flow at the moment.
Right.
So, just a quick reminder that a recording of this session will be available on Facebook as well as YouTube. Please do follow the End Bonded Labor Facebook page to stay up to date on news and updates and similar conversations in the future. In the meantime, stay safe, look out for each other, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you so much
Thank you
to
all.
everybody, and happy Children's Day.